68 years old, and I'm still the first one to the office. Even today, when my joints remind me of themselves with every step, I prefer to be at the workplace by 7 in the morning. A lifelong habit. Grandma Edith, as the younger employees call me behind my back. I don't think they put any disrespect into it. It's more a recognition that Brawley Chemicals and I are one and the same. My office occupies a corner space on the 15th floor of our building in downtown Trinidad. From here, I have a view of the bay and the industrial area where our main clients are located. I have always believed that you have to see the people you work for. It's not just a beautiful metaphor. From my window, I can actually see the pipes of the factories for which we supply specialty chemicals. Every morning, I have a ritual. I make a strong tea, not coffee. I never understood this American obsession with caffeine. Review the previous day's reports and make a list of tasks. Today's list is shorter than usual. In a month's time, I will officially hand over management of the company to Hazel, my only daughter. And I admit, there's a battle going on inside me between relief and fear. Brawley Chemicals started with a small lab in the garage of our first house. In 1980, I was a 33-year-old woman with a PhD in chemistry and an idea that no one took seriously. Environmentally friendly industrial solvents seemed like bliss at a time when everyone thought only about price and efficiency, not environmental impact. Arthur, my husband, believed in me even though he was far from chemistry himself. He taught history at a local college. Together we invested all our savings in equipment. I worked on the formulas at night, after my day job at the university lab. Arthur took care of the finances and communicating with potential clients. We got our first contract almost by accident. The manager of a small auto parts factory was looking for an alternative to expensive imported solvents and took a chance on trying our products. At that time, I was still mixing reagents in 5-liter canisters and delivering them on our old Ford. It's hard to imagine, but it wasn't just a job. It was a passion. Every successful formula, every new client, every step toward expansion made me feel like I was making a difference in the world, albeit in a small but concrete way. Hazel was born when our company was 3 years old. We had already moved into a small office and hired our first employees. Arthur insisted that I take only 3 months of maternity leave. The company couldn't manage longer without me. I brought my daughter into the office, setting up a baby corner right behind my desk. Maybe it wasn't up to safety standards, but in the 80s, things like that were easier to deal with. Hazel grew up with the company. She learned to walk between the desks of employees. Her first drawings adorned the walls of the lab. By the age of 10, she knew the names of basic chemical compounds and could explain to visitors what her mother was doing. As a teenager, she worked part-time for us during summer vacations, learning the business from the inside. I always knew that one day I would pass the company on to her. Arthur thought we shouldn't push our daughter, but I could see that she had inherited my business acumen, even though she was less interested in chemistry. When Hazel graduated from business school and returned to Trinidad, I offered her a position in the marketing department. I wanted her to go through all the steps before taking a management position. She took it with unexpected irritation. "Mom, I didn't get my MBA to do brochures and cold calls," she said over dinner. "That's exactly where I started, and it didn't stop me from starting a company," I replied, already feeling the first signs that our approaches to business differed. Hazel agreed, but she worked in marketing for only 6 months, after which I moved her to the position of assistant to the CFO. She was better there because she had Arthur's talent for numbers and analysis. My husband didn't live to see Hazel become vice president of the company. Cancer took him quickly and ruthlessly, just 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. It happened 12 years ago, and I've lived alone in our big house ever since, keeping his office untouched. It's probably silly, but some things I just can't let go of. After Arthur's death, Hazel became the one person close to me for whom I kept moving forward. A year later, she introduced me to Perry Holloway, a tall man with attentive eyes and an overly firm handshake. He worked as a business strategy consultant and struck me as overconfident, but Hazel glowed around him, and that was the main thing. "He understands me, Mom," she said. "I can be myself with him." I didn't say that somehow she couldn't be herself around me. That would have sounded like a rebuke, and I'd long ago learned to hold back such comments. Instead, I gave them the wedding that Hazel had dreamed of, with 300 guests, including all the important clients and partners. Business and personal have always been intertwined in our family. After the wedding, Perry offered his services to Brawley Chemicals as a strategic development consultant. I declined, explaining that I don't hire family members in key positions. It's my rule. In reality, I just didn't trust his trendy theories about disruption and pivots. He spoke the language of startups, and we were a stable company with a history and reputation. This was the first crack in our relationship. Hazel took my rejection as a personal insult. "You don't trust our vision," she said then. "You're stuck in the last century, Mom." Perhaps she was right. I was indeed suspicious of new business models, preferring proven approaches. My conservatism had gotten us through 3 economic crises without a single layoff. But in Hazel and Perry's eyes, it looked like fear of change. 5 years ago, I made Hazel CEO while remaining president of the company. At the same time, Perry finally got a position at Brawley Chemicals, becoming head of business development, which was created specifically for him. I had hoped that this would improve our relationship, but instead there were 2 camps: the traditional one, loyal to me, and the progressive one, rallying around the young couple. Over the last 6 months, I've noticed more and more wary glances and conversations quieting down when I appear. Yesterday, I walked into Hazel's office unannounced and saw her hurriedly closing some document on her computer screen. It was so obvious it was even embarrassing. "Was it something urgent?" I asked, pretending I hadn't noticed anything. "Just drafts of restructuring proposals," she replied with a strained smile. "Nothing concrete yet." I nodded and went on to discuss the quarterly report I was going to present to the board. Hazel listened absent-mindedly, occasionally glancing at the phone. "You don't agree with the numbers?" I asked, noticing her indifference. "It's okay, Mom. It's just—" She paused. "Maybe it's time to think about more ambitious goals. We've been stagnant for 3 years now." "Stability isn't treading water," I argued, "especially under the current circumstances." Hazel sighed as if she were explaining the obvious to a child. "Perry analyzed the market. If we don't grow aggressively now, we'll be overtaken by competitors in 5 years. Perry didn't cook up chemicals in his garage, risking poisoning himself to get his first order." I rarely mention my merits, but I couldn't help myself at that moment. "That's why we need a fresh set of eyes," Hazel parried. "Times have changed, Mom." That was the end of the conversation, but the residue remained. That evening, going through the mail at home, I came across a letter from our lawyer, Bennett Huxley, addressed to Hazel. It happened to be copied to me, though clearly not intended for my eyes. It was about finalizing the transfer documents and reviewing key positions. No details, just hints of some plans I didn't know about. I didn't call Hazel or Bennett. I decided to wait and see. Today, as I enter the office, I notice Perry and CFO Lowell Page quickly disperse at the sight of me, interrupting a lively conversation in the hallway. Perry nods at me with a strained smile. "Good morning, Edith. Early today." "As usual," I reply, noting that he's the only one in the company who addresses me by my first name instead of Mrs. Brawley. "Is Hazel here yet?" I ask, knowing my daughter rarely arrives before 9. "Not yet." He glances at his watch. She has a meeting with the bank representatives at 10, so she'll come straight there. What bank representatives? I don't recall that meeting on my schedule. Perry falters for a moment, then quickly regains his composure. Preliminary talks about extending the line of credit. Nothing specific, just getting to know each other. Interesting, I say. I'm usually the one in charge of these meetings. Hazel wanted to feel the ground first. He shrugs. You know how she likes to be prepared. I nod, pretending to accept that explanation, and walk to my office. Something is definitely going on behind my back, and I don't like it. I built this company from the ground up, put 40 years of my life into it. Does Hazel really think she can just push me aside? Turning on the computer, I look at the calendar of meetings and notice that several executive staff meetings have been held without my participation in recent weeks. Each time there was a reason. I was in a meeting with clients, or I was working on a new formula in the lab. Now these coincidences look suspicious. I dial the number of Bennett Huxley, our lawyer. He answers after the third ring, his voice sounding wary. Mrs. Brawley, what can I do for you? Bennett, I need you to prepare a full report on the current status of all of the company's legal documents, especially those relating to governance and delegation of authority. The pause drags on. Finally, he replies, Of course, Mrs. Brawley. But, if I may, didn't we discuss this last week with Hazel? The plan for the transfer of control has already been drawn up, and you? I want to see all the documents, Bennett. By the end of the day today, I said, my tone leaving no room for objection. Of course, he said, a touch of awkwardness in his voice. I'll send you everything you need. Hanging up the phone, I lean back in my chair and stare at the pictures on the wall. Our first lab, Arthur and I at the opening of the new office, Hazel in her graduation gown, the Brawley Chemicals team at the company's 20th anniversary, the story of a lifetime on the wall of one office. Maybe I really have been at the helm too long. Maybe it's time to really let go of the reins. I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to do. Prepare Hazel to take over my business. But not like this, not with these secret meetings and hidden agendas. There's a knock at the door, and my secretary, Irene, who's been with me for 23 years, enters. Mrs. Brawley, the production department sent over the latest test results on the new formula. They look promising. I thank her and pick up the folder of reports. This is my latest development, a biodegradable solvent for cleaning industrial pipelines. A project that Perry considers an unprofitable use of resources, but one that I believe in wholeheartedly. Looking over the numbers, I feel a sense of purpose and meaning return. Whatever Hazel and Perry are planning, I haven't said my last word yet. This is my company, and I will fight for its future, even if I have to stand up to my own daughter. The papers were on the table in front of me, a smooth stack of papers in a leather folder embossed with the Brawley Chemicals logo. Bennett Huxley, our lawyer, sat across from me, patiently waiting for me to go through each page. Behind him, the panoramic window overlooked Trinidad in the midday sun, the city that had become my home more than 40 years ago, when Arthur and I were just starting out. Everything is exactly as you instructed, Mrs. Brawley, Bennett said as I turned the next page. You retain a seat on the board and veto power over strategic decisions for the next 2 years. After that, the company would be completely under Hazel's management. I nodded, reading the fine print. 2 years was enough time to make sure my daughter was doing well, or to step in if things went wrong. And this restructuring clause? I pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the document. It hadn't been discussed at our last meeting. Bennett squirmed a little in his chair. It's an addendum from Hazel. It gives her the authority to reorganize departments and change leadership without further approval. But, as you can see, any such changes are still subject to your approval during the transition period. I tapped my pen on the table thoughtfully. This paragraph was an obvious attempt to circumvent my influence. Knowing Hazel, she would find a way to make any change seem urgent and necessary by putting me on the spot. Take it out, I said firmly. Any structural changes must be discussed with me beforehand. Hazel will object, Bennett said cautiously. Let him object. It's my company, and I haven't signed the papers yet. Bennett made a note and moved on to the next section. The process took almost 2 hours. I scrutinized each provision, asking questions, making revisions. Finally, the last page was turned. Make the corrections and send me the final version by 6 o'clock tonight, I said, standing up. I want to go over it again before I see Hazel tomorrow. When Bennett left, I went to the window. A strange feeling came over me, a mixture of relief and anxiety. On the one hand, the burden of running the company on a daily basis was getting heavier as I grew older. The sleepless nights over reports, the constant tension, the responsibility for hundreds of employees, all of it was draining. On the other hand, Brawley Chemicals was a part of me, an extension of my personality. Giving it up was like giving up part of my soul. The phone on the desk rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Oswald, my older brother. Eddie, did you remember our lunch? His low voice sounded a little grumpy, like it always did when he thought I was too absorbed in my work. Shit. I glanced at my watch. I'm sorry, Ossie. I got caught up in the paperwork. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Let me pick you up, he suggested. I'm passing by your office anyway. I agreed, quickly finished a few urgent things, and went down to the lobby. Oswald, punctual as always, was already waiting for me in his old Volvo. Despite the fact that he was 73 years old, he still drove himself and categorically refused my offers to hire a driver. You look exhausted, he said as I got into the car. Are you still dealing with the transfer of the company? We're signing the final documents tomorrow, I said, buckling up. I just wanted to make sure everything was accounted for. Oswald grinned as he pulled onto the road. How do you like the prospect of letting go of the reins? Have you thought about what you're going to do in retirement? Maybe you'll finally agree to go on that Mediterranean cruise with me. I smiled. Oswald had been trying to get me on that cruise for the 3rd year since he retired after 35 years of teaching economics at the university. You know, it's not like I'm going to retire completely. I'm going to stay on the board and advise on technical matters. Eddie, he glanced at me briefly. You're not good at letting go. I never have. Remember how you cried when I left for college? You were only 9, and you clung to my jacket like I was leaving forever. This is different, I countered. The company isn't just a job, it's part of you, I know, he finished for me. That's why I'm worried. What happens if Hazel starts to change things? If she doesn't live up to your expectations? Are you ready for that? We pulled up to a small restaurant on the waterfront, our traditional Wednesday night meeting place. Oswald turned off the engine, but did not hurry to get out, waiting for my answer. I trust Hazel, I said at last. She grew up in this company, knows it inside and out. She has a fresh perspective, and maybe some changes are really necessary. Oswald looked at me doubtfully. Do you believe that? Or are you just trying to convince yourself? I looked away. My brother always had a knack for getting to the heart of the matter. A little of both, I admitted. But isn't that the point? To give the next generation a chance to prove themselves? Sure, he nodded. Just don't forget that Hazel isn't you, and her husband? What about him? I tensed. Oswald shrugged. I just got the impression that Perry is a typical careerist, the kind of guy who thinks 2 moves ahead, but only for his own benefit. You've only met him 3 times, I said, though I shared his assessment in my heart. Sometimes 3 times is enough. He opened the door. Come on, I'm starving. And I promise not to talk about your company anymore, at least until we order dessert. At dinner, as promised, Oswald did not mention Brawley chemicals. Instead, he talked about his grandchildren, the new lecture course he was teaching as a visiting professor, and his plans for a summer vacation. I listened, asked questions, laughed at his jokes, but part of my mind was still in the office, going over the details of the impending transfer of control. When the waiter brought coffee, Oswald leaned back in his chair and looked at me carefully. "Do you know what worries me the most?" he asked. "Not that you're giving away the company, but that you're trying to keep in touch with Hazel through it. It's like without Brawley Chemicals, there's nothing left between you two." His words hit unexpectedly hard, because there was truth in them. After Arthur's death, my connection with my daughter became increasingly formal, centered around work. We rarely talked about anything personal, hardly spent any time together outside of the office. Even on family holidays, the conversation inevitably turned to business. "I've tried," I said quietly. "But sometimes I think Hazel just waits for me to step aside, that I'm an obstacle to her, not a mother." Oswald covered my hand with his. "Then maybe it's for the best. Let go of the company. Focus on rebuilding a relationship with your daughter. And if that doesn't work, then," he smiled softly, "you always have an annoying older brother dragging you on a cruise." I laughed, feeling the tension release a little. Oswald always knew how to find the right words. When I returned to the office after lunch, I was in for a surprise. Several key people were gathered in the reception area. Irene, my constant secretary, Lawrence Fielding, the lab manager who had been with me since the garage days, Vance Pryor, head of production, and Nellie Quint, head of quality control. "What's wrong?" I asked, sensing something wrong right away. "Problems with the new formula?" Lawrence, a tall, thin man with disheveled gray hair, stepped forward. "Mrs. Brawley, we've heard about the signing tomorrow," he began, "and we wanted to speak to you privately." I invited them into my office and offered them a seat. Irene closed the door and took a seat next to the others. I remained standing, leaning on the edge of the desk. "I'm listening." They looked at each other, as if deciding who would begin. Finally, Vance, the youngest of the group, barely 40, coughed. "Mrs. Brawley, we're worried about the future of the company," he said. "There have been rumors lately about the drastic changes Hazel and Mr. Holloway are planning after they hand over control." "What rumors?" I tried to speak calmly, though my insides clenched with anxiety. "They say they're going to downsize the lab and switch to buying ready-made formulas from outside developers." Lawrence looked worried. "That would kill the very essence of Brawley Chemicals. We've always prided ourselves on in-house development, and there's talk of moving production to Mexico," Vance added, "allegedly to cut costs. But quality will inevitably suffer, not to mention our jobs." Nellie, usually reserved, now looked almost angry. "And today I overheard Mr. Holloway discussing with the CFO the possibility of selling our environmental division," she said, "the one you've been developing for the last 10 years. I walked slowly around the table and sat down in my chair. The information was disturbing, but not entirely unexpected. I'd suspected that Hazel and Perry had their own plans for the company, but I hadn't realized they were so radical. "Are you sure these rumors are true?" I asked. "We wouldn't bother you without a reason," Irene replied, "especially on the eve of such an important decision." I nodded, recognizing the validity of her words. These people weren't just employees. They were the backbone of the company, its foundation. Some of them had been with me longer than Hazel had been alive. "I appreciate your loyalty and concern," I said, "but I want to assure you that the company will not be completely handed over to Hazel. I retain veto power over strategic decisions for the next 2 years. There will be no radical changes without my consent." They looked a little reassured, but still concerned. "What will happen in 2 years?" Lawrence asked. That was a good question to which I had no ready answer. Let's get through those 2 years first, I replied. Perhaps by then Hazel will better understand the value of our traditions and approaches. When they left, I was alone, pondering what I had heard. Is Hazel really planning to change the company so radically? And if so, do I have the right to stand in her way? After all, I'd chosen her to be my successor, trained her for the role. An intercom call interrupted my musings. Mrs. Brawley. Irene's voice sounded tense. Hazel wants to see you. She's waiting in the conference room with Mr. Holloway and Mr. Huxley. I'll be right there, I answered, feeling my pulse quicken. The conference room was on the same floor, at the end of the hallway. When I entered, Hazel, Perry, and Bennett were already sitting at a long table, folders of documents in front of them. On the big screen on the wall was a presentation with the Brawley Chemicals logo and the words Development Strategy, 2025 to 2030. Mom, it's great that you could come. Hazel smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. We wanted to discuss with you some details of tomorrow's signing and at the same time present our strategy for the next 5 years. I thought we agreed that the strategy would be discussed after the official handover, I remarked, sitting down across from them. That's right, Perry interjected. But it seemed right to give you a preview of our plans, so there wouldn't be any surprises. Something in his tone made me wary. Perry seemed overconfident, almost smug. Hazel began her presentation, talking about plans to expand the market, introduce new technologies, and optimize production. Much of it sounded reasonable, even inspiring. But then she moved on to specific measures. We plan to reduce the laboratory department by 40%, she said, moving on to the next slide. Research will focus on refining existing formulas, and the development of brand new formulations will be outsourced. This would save about $2 million a year. I felt my fists clench under the table. Lawrence was right. What about our advantage in the form of unique developments? I asked. An in-house lab has always been the heart of Brawley Chemicals. That's an outdated model, Mom. Hazel shook her head. It's more efficient to buy off-the-shelf solutions and customize them. Next, she continued, we're looking at the possibility of moving production of the basic components to Mexico. That would save us another $3 million annually. Vance was right, too. I was beginning to understand why they had decided to present this strategy now, on the eve of the signing. They wanted to gauge my reaction, see how much I'd resist their plans. What about the environmental side? I asked, remembering what Nellie had said. Was that outdated, too? Hazel and Perry exchanged quick glances. We believe that environmental engineering doesn't fit our core business, Perry said cautiously. It's never been a profitable line of business, and we think that you want to sell it, I finished for him. To whom? There are several interested parties, he said evasively. But these are preliminary talks. Nothing's finalized. I looked at Bennett, who had been silent all this time, avoiding my gaze. Bennett, were you aware of these plans when you prepared the transfer documents? The lawyer squirmed in his chair. Mrs. Brawley, I was familiar with the general outlines of the strategy, but not the specific details. So, you deliberately withheld information from me that could have influenced my decision? Mom, Hazel interjected, Bennett had nothing to do with it. We just wanted to wait for the official transfer of power before we got into the details. And besides, all these decisions will go through the board of directors, where you have veto power. For 2 years, I reminded him. And then you can do whatever you want. It's a business, Mom. Hazel's voice turned steely. It has to evolve, adapt. We can't cling to outdated models forever just because you care about them. I looked at my daughter, at her determined face, at the hard line of her lips, so similar to my own. She was right, in her own way. Businesses do need to change, but what they were proposing was not development. It was the destruction of the very essence of Brawley Chemicals. I'm not going to comment on your strategy now, I said, standing up. Tomorrow we will sign the documents as planned. But I want you to understand that I'm not going to let you destroy what I've spent a lifetime building. Nobody's going to destroy anything, Perry objected. We want to take the company to the next level. I just shook my head and walked out of the room. I needed time to think, to weigh the pros and cons. Maybe Oswald was right, and I should just let the company go, let the next generation go its own way, even if it seemed wrong to me. Back in the office, I found an envelope on the desk with the final version of the documents from Bennett. He'd made all the edits I'd requested. All I had to do was sign them tomorrow, and Brawley Chemicals would be officially under Hazel's management. I sat down at my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a picture I didn't normally display. It showed Arthur and me standing in front of the garage where it all began. Young, enthusiastic, believing in our business. Arthur was holding the first canister of our solvent, and I had my arm around his waist, laughing at something he had just said. "What would you do, Arthur?" I whispered, looking at the picture. "Would you have let go? Or fought to the end?" There was no answer, of course, only my own reflection in the glass of the frame, the face of a woman who must make a decision that would determine the fate of her life's work. I woke up long before dawn, when the first rays of the sun had not yet touched the horizon. Insomnia had become my faithful companion in recent weeks, but today it seemed especially stubborn. I lay in bed, watching the darkness outside the window slowly change to the gray pre-dawn light, and thought about the day ahead, the day that was to be the culmination of my life, the official handing over of Brawley Chemicals into the hands of my daughter. After much deliberation, I decided to sign the paperwork unchanged. Despite the doubts, despite the alarm bells, despite the warnings of Oswald and the loyal staff. After all, I had raised Hazel myself, prepared her for this role. If I couldn't trust her with the company, then I'd failed as a mother and a mentor. At 6:30, I was already on my feet, taking a shower, choosing clothes. I decided on a navy blue suit, the same one I'd worn to the company's 20th anniversary party. It sat a little looser on me now that the years had taken away some of my physical mass, but it still looked presentable. I completed the look with modest pearl earrings, a gift from Arthur for our 10th wedding anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw not only the president of Brawley Chemicals, but also an older woman with a fine network of wrinkles around her eyes and silver in her hair. A woman who had to finally admit that her time was coming to an end. A sudden lump in my throat made me turn away from the mirror. At 7:15, the company driver was already waiting for me outside my house. George, who had worked for us for over 15 years, smiled as he opened the car door. "Good morning, Mrs. Brawley. Exciting day today, isn't it?" "Not a word, George," I replied, climbing into the back seat. "We're all proud of you, ma'am," he said, getting behind the wheel. "And Miss Hazel, too. She's grown up in front of our eyes, and now she's gonna run the company. It's like royalty, isn't it? Passing of the throne and all that." I forced myself to smile, though the royal family analogy seemed inappropriate. Monarchs rarely abdicate willingly, and their heirs don't always show gratitude. On the way to the office, I looked over the day's program that Irene had drawn up. 10 a.m., signing of documents in the presence of lawyers and board members. 11:30, a formal handover ceremony in the conference room, which would be attended by all the head office staff. Then a buffet, an interview for the local business newspaper, and finally, in the evening, a private dinner for the management team at the Azure restaurant. The day promised to be eventful and emotional. I hoped my makeup and self-control would hold up to the end of it. When we pulled up to the Brawley Chemicals building, it was exactly 8 in the morning. The security guard in the parking lot saluted me, as he always did. In the lobby was Martha, the receptionist who'd been greeting visitors with a smile and a steady, "Can I help you?" for 10 years. "Good morning, Mrs. Brawley," she greeted me. "It's the big day. We've got the conference room ready, the florists have the flowers, and the caterers will be here at 10:30. "Thank you, Martha," I nodded. "Is Hazel here yet?" "Not yet, but she called to say she'd be here at 9 with Mr. Holloway." I went up to the 15th floor. The office wasn't yet filled with the usual morning bustle. Most of the employees were here by 9. Only the most dedicated, like Irene, were already in place. "Good morning, Mrs. Brawley." Irene stood up from her desk as I entered the reception area. "How are you feeling?" "Like a man who's about to jump out of a parachute, not sure if it's gonna open," I answered honestly. Irene smiled understandingly. "It's going to be fine. You've built a strong company, and Miss Hazel has grown under your leadership. She'll be fine." I didn't say that my doubts were not so much about Hazel's abilities as about her intentions. Instead, I simply nodded and went to my office. I spent the next 2 hours sorting through paperwork, answering emails and calls. Work had always been my salvation. It helped me distract myself from anxious thoughts, focus on specific tasks. But today, even it couldn't completely calm my anxiety. At 9:30, there was a knock at the door. It was Irene. "Miss Hazel and Mr. Holloway have arrived," she announced. "They ask that you join them in the conference room for a preliminary discussion before the ceremony." I thanked her, and after gathering the necessary paperwork, I headed to the designated room. Strangely, Hazel chose one of the common conference rooms for the meeting, not my office or her own. When I entered the room, only Hazel and Perry were there. They were sitting side by side at the far end of a long table, leaning over some papers. They both looked up at me, and I noticed a strange expression on my daughter's face, a mixture of impatience and triumph. Triumph? "Mom, it's great that you came." Hazel pointed to the chair across from them. "There's something we need to discuss before the official ceremony." I sat down, placing the file in front of me. "I thought the lawyers would be here," I said. "They'll be here later," Perry said. "We wanted to talk to you first." In the family circle, something in his tone made me wary. I looked at Hazel carefully. She looked unusually tense, though she tried to hide it behind a businesslike facade. "What's going on?" I asked bluntly. Hazel and Perry glanced at each other. Then she slid a thin folder toward me. "We've made some minor changes to the agreement," she said. "Nothing major, just clarifying a few things." I opened the folder and began to read. It was clear from the first lines that it wasn't a minor change. The entire section on my veto power had been completely rewritten. It now applied only to budget-related issues and was limited to 1 year instead of 2. The clause about my seat on the board remained, but without a casting vote. "That's not what we agreed on." I looked up at my daughter. "It actually deprives me of the ability to influence strategic decisions." "That's exactly the point, Mom." Hazel straightened up. "If you really trust me to run the company, you should let me make decisions without your interference. Trust doesn't preclude control, especially when it comes to my life's work." I countered. "I wouldn't sign that." Perry leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. Mrs. Brawley, let's be honest. You've built a great company, but times have changed. Your methods, your vision, they're outdated. Hazel is ready to take Brawley Chemicals to the next level, but she can't do it if you keep looking back. And what exactly are you planning to do with my company?" I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. "It's not yours anymore, Mom," Hazel replied sharply. "As soon as you sign these papers, the company will be mine, and I'll run it as I see fit." I felt my anger rising in a wave. "I'm not signing a new version. We'll stick to the original agreement, or there will be no transfer." Hazel leaned back in her chair, her face hard. You know, I thought you were going to say that. That's why we had a backup prepared. She pulled another folder out of her briefcase and placed it on the table. This is the independent medical examiner's report on your inability to continue to run the company due to age and declining health. And here's a petition from the board of directors to remove you as president. Not all of them signed, of course, but most of them did. I stared at the documents, unable to believe my eyes. A medical report? I haven't had any medical examinations. A petition? When did they organize this? It's, it's illegal. My voice shook. I'm going to sue. You can try, Perry shrugged. But a lawsuit would take months, if not years. And in that time, the company could be in serious trouble. Is that what you want? Destroy what you've spent your whole life building just to prove a point? I looked at Hazel, looking for any sign of doubt or remorse in her eyes, but all I saw was cold determination. Why? I asked quietly. Why couldn't you just wait? In 2 years, the company would have been all yours anyway, because in 2 years, you would have blocked all of our initiatives, she replied. Perry and I have already gotten preliminary approval from investors for a major expansion, but for that, we need complete freedom of action now, not in 2 years. At 10 o'clock sharp, I entered the large conference room where all the employees were already gathered. The handover ceremony was to begin any minute now. I noticed Hazel and Perry whispering about something at the podium, occasionally casting glances at me. Bennett Huxley, our lawyer, was standing next to them, holding a file folder. As I stepped up to the podium, a murmur of approval ran through the room. Several people applauded. Ladies and gentlemen, Bennett began, we are gathered here today to witness a historic moment for Brawley Chemicals. Mrs. Edith Brawley, the founder and permanent president of the company, is handing over the reins to her daughter, Hazel Brawley Holloway. As he spoke, I watched the faces of those gathered. For them, it was a day of celebration, a passing of the baton from one generation to the next. None of them knew what had happened behind closed doors, the blackmail and the threats. And now, without further ado, I invite Mrs. Brawley to say a few words before signing the papers. Bennett finished, handing me the microphone. I took it, feeling the gravity of the moment. The hall fell silent in anticipation. Hazel looked at me with ill-concealed impatience. 40 years ago, I began, my late husband Arthur and I founded this company with the sole purpose of creating products that would not only be effective, but also safe for the environment. That was our principle, our mission. And over the years, I've tried to follow that mission, even when it wasn't financially profitable. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I always knew that one day I would hand over the company to my daughter, prepared her for it, taught her everything I knew. And today was that day. I could feel Hazel relaxing beside me, thinking I'd given up. However, I continued, raising my voice, I cannot agree to some of the changes that are planned after I leave, changes that go against the very essence of Brawley Chemicals. A surprised whisper ran through the hall. Hazel turned sharply toward me, her face pale. Mother, she hissed, what are you doing? What I have to do, I answered firmly and turned to the hall again. I've learned that immediately after the transfer of control, it is planned to sell a large part of the company's shares to competitors, reduce the laboratory, and move production abroad. This is not development. It is the destruction of everything we have created for decades. Now the whispering had grown into a rumble of voices. Perry stepped forward and tried to take the microphone from me, but I stepped back. Mrs. Brawley, you're violating the confidentiality of business information, he said loudly. This is unacceptable. Enough of this farce. Hazel couldn't take it anymore, grabbing the microphone. Mom, you just can't accept that your time has passed. You cling to power, to your outdated ideas, not allowing the company to develop. Her voice broke into a shout, her face contorted with rage. You're just a helpless old woman who's afraid of change. Go away, and don't stop us from saving what you have almost destroyed with your stubbornness. There was dead silence in the hall. I felt the color drain from my face. Never, even in the most heated arguments, had Hazel ever spoken to me in such a tone. Never called me so demeaning. Hazel? Bennett's voice sounded shocked. This is out of line. No, she's out of line. Hazel pointed a trembling finger at me. She promised to hand over the company, and now she's making a scene in front of all the employees. Perry came toward me with determination. Mrs. Brawley, either you sign the papers right now, or we'll hold an emergency board meeting and remove you forcibly. We already have all the necessary paperwork. I looked him straight in the eye. I'm not signing those papers. Do whatever you want. Perry turned to the guards standing at the door. Dash escort Mrs. Brawley out of the building. She doesn't work here anymore. The guards looked around uncertainly, unsure of what to do. Perry nodded again, more emphatically. Wait, he said suddenly, turning to Hazel. We need to clear out her office. There may be important documents in there that she'll try to take with her. Hazel nodded, and Perry quickly left the room. I stood there stunned by what was happening, unable to believe that my own daughter was doing this to me. A few minutes later, Perry returned with a box full of my personal belongings from the study. Everything we need we've already taken, he said. You can have the rest. I silently took the box. It contained photos, awards, personal notes, the little things that had accumulated over 40 years of work. Now go away, Hazel said without looking at me, and don't come back. I turned back to the hall where the shocked employees were still standing. I believe many of you remember what this company was built on, I said quietly, and I hope that you will keep those principles no matter what. With those words, I headed for the exit. Perry followed me, carrying a box of my things. When we reached the elevator, he turned abruptly toward an open window at the end of the hallway. You know what, Mrs. Brawley? He said with a smirk. I don't think you need this junk. And before I could say anything, he dumped the contents of the box out the window. Photos, papers, small souvenirs. All of it flew down from the 15th floor. Oops, he said with feigned regret. What a mess. I stood there, unable to believe what was happening. This wasn't just a dismissal. It was a deliberate humiliation, an attempt to break me completely. You'll regret this, I said quietly. I doubt it, Perry replied. Now get out before I call the police. I took the elevator down to the lobby. Martha, the receptionist, looked at me with bewilderment and sympathy. Minus Mrs. Brawley, what's going on? She asked. I just got a call saying you're no longer. It's all right, Martha, I interrupted her, trying to keep my dignity. It's just, there's been a change of plans. I walked out of the building that had been my second home for 4 decades. On the sidewalk were my things that Perry had thrown out the window. Some passers-by looked curiously at the trash, unaware that they were shards of my life. I walked slowly to the edge of the sidewalk and picked up a broken framed photograph, the same one where Arthur and I stood in front of our first garage laboratory. The glass was cracked, but the image was intact. Shoving the picture into my purse, I walked away from the Brawley Chemicals building without looking back. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do next. All I knew was that this wasn't over. I spent the first hours after being expelled from my own company in a daze. I walked to the nearest park and sat on a bench, probably for ages, trying to realize what had happened. My phone was ringing off the hook, but I couldn't find the strength to answer it. Oswald, Irene, even our lawyer, Bennett Huxley, all tried to contact me, but I just stared at the screen until the battery ran out. It was only towards evening that I found the strength to call a cab and drive to my brother's house. Oswald lived in a small but cozy house on the outskirts of Trinidad, in a quiet neighborhood where mostly professors and teachers from the local university lived. When I knocked on his door, he opened it almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for me all day. "Eddie," was all he said before he hugged me tightly. I hadn't cried during the ceremony, hadn't cried when Perry threw my stuff out the window, hadn't cried sitting in the park. But now, in the arms of my brother, the protective wall that had stood between me and the world since our parents died, I finally let the tears flow. "I know everything," Oswald said quietly, leading me into the living room. "Irene called me right after the incident. I tried to reach you." "I couldn't talk," I replied hoarsely, sinking into his old leather chair. I couldn't believe that that she was capable of such a thing. Oswald shook his head, pouring me whiskey, a drink I didn't normally touch. "Have a drink." He handed me the glass. "It's all right for you tonight." I took a sip, feeling the alcohol burn my throat. The warmth spread slowly through my body, dulling the sharp pain of betrayal a little. "Tell me everything," Oswald asked, sitting down across from me. "From the beginning." And I did, about how Hazel and Perry had altered the documents, about the false medical report, about how my daughter called me a helpless old lady in front of all the staff, about how Perry threw my personal belongings off the 15th floor. Oswald's face grew darker with each word. It's, it's just unheard of," he said when I was done. "Hazel has always been ambitious, but I never thought her capable of such cruelty." "Neither did I grinned bitterly. "I guess I didn't know my own daughter very well." "What are you going to do?" Oswald asked after a long pause. I shook my head. "I don't know. Part of me wants to fight, to sue, to prove that the medical report is fake, but the other part just wants to let it go. Which part is stronger?" I've been thinking. 10 hours ago, I wouldn't have hesitated to fight, but now that the initial shock was wearing off, I wasn't so sure. "I don't know, Aussie. Honestly, I don't know. You don't have to decide now," he said softly. "Stay here as long as you need to. My spare room is always ready for you." I didn't sleep much that night, lying in the dark, listening to the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, and trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. Maybe I'd been too hard on Hazel as a child. Maybe I'd pushed her too hard, preparing her for the role of successor. Or, on the contrary, I allowed too much, didn't teach her compassion and respect. In the morning, I was awakened by the doorbell. Oswald had already left for lectures. I found a note on the kitchen table, wishing me rest and promising to be back for lunch. I threw on his old robe and went to open it. On the doorstep stood Dora Blackwell, my oldest friend, whom we'd gone to university together. For the last 20 years, she had been editor-in-chief of the local business newspaper, the Trinidad Business Review. "Edith Brawley," she said sternly, "do you have any idea how worried I've been? Irene called me yesterday to tell me what had happened, and you wouldn't pick up the phone." "My phone was dead," I said guiltily, letting her into the house. Dora gave me a critical look. "You look terrible, darling, but under the circumstances, it's forgivable." She went into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator in her masterly way, and shook her head. "Just as I thought. Oswald has only beer and convenience foods. I've brought real food." Dora pulled containers of home-cooked food out of her bulky bag and began to heat up breakfast, still talking. "All anyone in town is talking about is last night's scandal. Your daughter, of course, is trying to put it all in a favorable light. Supposedly, you didn't manage well, started forgetting important details, and they were forced to take over the reins to save the company." "And how many people believe that?" I asked, sitting down at the table. The official version sounds plausible, Dora shrugged, but those who know you personally realize it's bullshit. You're in better shape than most executives half your age. She set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. Eat up. You can't solve serious problems on an empty stomach. I obediently began to eat, even though I couldn't get a bite down my throat. Dora poured coffee for both of us and sat down across from me. Now tell me, I want to know everything, no strings attached. By the time I finished my story, the coffee was long gone. Dora listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, and when I stopped talking, she took a deep breath. You know, I always thought Hazel was too cold and calculating for her age, but even I didn't expect her to be so cruelty. I think it's more Perry's influence, I said. He's always been ambitious. Don't make excuses for her, Dora said sharply. Hazel is a grown woman and she's made her choice. The question is, what are you going to do now? I shook my head. Everyone asks me that, and I still don't know the answer. Well, Dora tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. Let's look at the options. 1. You sue, challenge the fake medical report, try to regain control of the company. It's a long and messy process that could take years. And during that time, they can completely change the company, I added. Exactly. The second option is that you back off. Let them do whatever they want with Brawley Chemicals, and you do what? Retire? Start something new? I've been thinking. The thought of just stepping aside seemed almost sacrilegious. But at the same time, fighting for the company meant continuing the conflict with my daughter, which would further destroy our already broken relationship. There's a third option, I said slowly. I could watch from the sidelines, not actively interfere, but not disappear completely. I still have connections in the industry, a reputation. I can wait for them to back themselves into a corner, Dora finished with a sly smile, and then decide whether to pick up the pieces or start something completely new. Something like that, I nodded. I like that plan. Dora finished her cooled coffee. And you know what? I can help you keep up with what's going on. My newspaper keeps tabs on every significant business in town. If Hazel and Perry start something big, we'll know about it. At that moment, the doorbell rang. We looked at each other. Are you expecting someone? Dora asked. I shook my head and went to open it. Lawrence Fielding, our lab manager, with whom we had worked since the company was founded, stood on the doorstep. Mrs. Brawley. He looked tired and worried. I'm sorry to intrude. I had to ask Irene for your address. Lawrence, what's wrong? I let him into the house. Come in, don't stand on the threshold. He went into the living room, where Dora was still sitting, and greeted her awkwardly. You probably already know what happened after you left, he began, sinking into a chair. Hazel and Perry gathered all the department heads and announced a new era in the company's history. They presented a radical restructuring plan that included. He hesitated, as if hesitating to continue. Include what, Lawrence? I nudged him gently. A 60% reduction in the lab, he exhaled. Not 40 as originally planned, but 60. That means most of our long-term research projects will be shut down, including your development of biodegradable solvents. I felt my insides tighten. This project was my personal brainchild, the result of 10 years of research. We were close to a breakthrough that could change an entire industry. When would that happen? I asked, trying to remain calm. It's already happening, Lawrence replied bitterly. This morning, half of my team received layoff notices. I was told that I could stay, but only if I agreed to work exclusively on refining existing formulas. No new developments, no experiments. Yeah? I refused. Oh, Lawrence, I squeezed his hand. I'm so sorry. Don't be, Mrs. Brawley, he smiled weakly. I've been thinking about opening a small laboratory of my own for a long time. I just didn't expect it to happen so suddenly. You're not the only one they fired, he added after a pause. Vance is gone too, refusing to accept their plan to move production to Mexico. Nellie's hanging in there for now, but only because without the quality control department, they can't get the certifications they need for the new contracts. I shook my head, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the changes. In just one day, Hazel and Perry had begun to tear down what had been decades in the making. What about the rest of the employees? How are they reacting? A lot of them are shocked, Lawrence replied, especially after they found out about your leaving. Some have already started looking for new jobs. Others are hoping that things will sort themselves out somehow. But the atmosphere, it's not the same company, Mrs. Brawley. It's not the Brawley chemicals we all knew. After Lawrence left, Dora looked at me thoughtfully. They act fast. Too fast. Like they're afraid you'll find a way to come back and stop them. Or like they have some kind of deadline, I remarked. Something we don't know about. You mentioned some investors. Global Chem? I nodded. One of our main competitors. Perry said they were willing to put up $50 million in exchange for a 30% stake. Dash, dash, Dora pulled out her cell phone and dialed something quickly. That's odd. From what I can tell, Global Chem is in no position to make that kind of investment. They're in financial trouble themselves after the failure of their latest product line. Maybe Perry was bluffing, I suggested, trying to scare me with the prospect of losing control of the company. Or maybe they have another investor they didn't want to tell you about, Dora said thoughtfully. I can have our financial analyst look into that information. By the time Oswald came back, we had an outline of a plan of action. I decided not to sue immediately, but not to dismiss the possibility entirely. Instead, Dora and I agreed to gather information about what was happening at Brawley Chemicals under the new management. If Hazel and Perry are really leading the company to collapse, I'll have the evidence I need for a lawsuit. A wise decision, Oswald approved, after hearing our plan. But what are you going to do in the short term? You can't just sit here and wait for news. That was a good question. For the first time in 40 years, I had no company demanding my attention, no office to go to every morning, no employees waiting for my decisions. I think I could use this time to finish the research we started with Lawrence. Just because Hazel closed the project doesn't mean the idea has no value. Do you have the data? Oswald asked. I nodded. Backup copies of all the key documents. I kept them on a flash drive that I always carried with me. I had a hunch that something like this might happen. And where do you plan to do your research? You don't have access to the lab anymore. Lawrence mentioned that he was thinking of opening a small laboratory of his own. Dora interjected. Maybe you two could join forces. The idea was interesting. Lawrence was a brilliant chemist, and I had a background in business management. Together we could create something new, perhaps even competing with Brawley Chemicals in certain niches. It's worth discussing, I agreed. But first, I have more down-to-earth issues to deal with, like where I'm going to live. At my place, of course, Oswald said in surprise. As much as you like. That's very kind of you, Aussie, but we both know it's a temporary solution. I need my own space. You could go back to your house, Dora suggested. It's still your property, despite what happened with the company. I shook my head. There are too many memories there, and I don't want to risk running into Hazel or Perry if they decide to stop by. No, I need something new, a new place for a new chapter of my life. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in finding a place to live and thinking about future plans. Dora used her connections in the local media to keep up with news about Brawley Chemicals. The news came one more disturbing than the other. Hazel and Perry had indeed laid off more than half of the research department. The manufacturing division was preparing to move to Mexico, which meant job losses for hundreds of local employees. the company's stock began to decline after the market reacted to the news of the drastic restructuring. But most disturbing was that Hazel and Perry appeared to have taken out a huge loan against the company's assets. According to the information Dora managed to get, the money was used not for business development, but to buy back shares from minority shareholders, an apparent attempt to consolidate control before selling a large stake to an outside investor. They're driving the company into debt, Dora said grimly, showing me the latest figures. If their plan doesn't work, Brawley Chemicals could be on the verge of bankruptcy in a matter of months, or even weeks, added Lawrence, with whom we had begun to meet regularly to discuss possible cooperation. According to my sources, several major customers have already expressed concern about the quality of the product after the lab cuts and are preparing to cancel their contracts. I listened to this news with a heavy heart. Despite Hazel's betrayal, it pained me to see my life's work destroyed. But at the same time, each day I became more and more certain that my future lay somewhere else. A week after my expulsion from the company, I found a small but cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the opposite side of town from the Brawley Chemicals office. Oswald helped me move the things I'd decided to take from my home, with Arthur mostly personal items, photos, books. As I set up my new place, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. For the first time in decades, I could make a space completely to my liking without worrying about what Hazel would say or how it would fit in with our family. You know, I said to Dora when she came in to see my new apartment, I'm beginning to think this banishment from the company might be liberating. What do you mean? She wondered, accepting the cup of tea I held out to her. For 40 years, I've lived only for the company. Every decision, every move, everything was for Brawley Chemicals. Even my relationship with my daughter was centered around the business. Now I have a chance to just be me, to do what I really love without having to think about quarterly reports and board opinions. And what do you really love to do, Edith Brawley? Dora asked with a smile. I wondered. The question was more complicated than it seemed at first glance. For so many years, I had defined myself through the company that I had almost forgotten who I was outside of it. I love chemistry, I finally said. Real chemistry, not the business around it. I love the moment of discovery when, after dozens of failed experiments, you suddenly find the right formula. I love knowing that my work makes the world a little better, a little cleaner. Then maybe that's what you should focus on, Dora suggested. Forget mass production, forget marketing, forget all that corporate tinsel. Set up a small research lab with Lawrence and do what really matters. The idea sounded appealing. Back to the roots, back to where it all started. Pure science, research. You know, I said slowly, it could work. I have enough savings to start a small lab. Lawrence has connections with equipment suppliers. We could focus on developing environmentally friendly alternatives to industrial chemicals, the very niche that Hazel had decided to give up. Sounds like a plan, Dora smiled. And you know what? I think a lot of your former clients will be happy to work with you directly, especially when they hear that you're continuing to develop green technologies. For the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of enthusiasm. Maybe the end of Brawley Chemicals, for me at least, was not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new one. An opportunity to return to what had always been my true passion? With that thought in mind, I began sketching out a plan for the new lab, already envisioning how Lawrence and I would work on projects without the pressure of quarterly reports and shareholder demands. It was uplifting. Life went on, and perhaps there were more opportunities in this new chapter than I could have imagined just a week ago. Day 5 in my new life began with an unexpected phone call. I was just finishing my morning tea, reviewing notes on a biodegradable solvents project when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar and I almost decided not to answer, but changed my mind at the last moment. Edith Brawley speaking, I said, holding the phone to my ear. Mrs. Brawley, good morning, came a familiar voice. This is Lowell Page, CFO, former CFO of Brawley Chemicals. I straightened in my chair. Lowell was one of the people who'd signed the petition to oust me, though we'd always gotten along well before that. What could he possibly need now? Good morning, Lowell. To what do I owe this sudden interest? There was confusion in his voice. Yeah, I'm calling to apologize, Mrs. Brawley, and to warn you, the situation at the company is critical. I've just resigned. I can't be a part of this madness. What madness? I asked, feeling my pulse quicken. Everything. He took a deep breath. Hazel and Perry have completely lost control of the situation. The company is on the verge of collapse, and it's only 5 days after you left. I set the cup on the table, afraid to spill the tea. 5 days. Just 5 days to start tearing down what I'd spent 40 years building. Tell me more, I asked, trying to stay calm. Where to start? Lowell grinned bitterly. How about the fact that three of our biggest clients, Prime Engineering, East Coast Petroleum, and Trinidad Manufacturing, have announced that they're canceling their contracts? They bluntly said they didn't trust the new management and were concerned about product quality after the massive layoffs at the lab. I exhaled slowly. Those three companies accounted for almost 30% of our annual turnover. What else? First Commerce Bank had denied the line of credit Hazel and Perry had requested. They were planning to use the money to buy out minority shareholders before selling the Global Chem stake. Now, the deal's in jeopardy. What about the current operations? I asked, remembering that the end of the month was always a tight period in terms of cash flow. A disaster, Lowell answered bluntly. With the layoffs in the production department, efficiency is down 40%. We're missing delivery deadlines, which leads to contract penalties, plus severance costs for the laid-off employees. I tried to warn them that we can't afford the current outflow of funds, but they wouldn't listen. Why did you decide to call me, Lowell? I asked you directly. You signed the petition to oust me. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. I made a mistake, Mrs. Brawley, he said at last. Perry convinced me that this was the only way to save the company from outdated management practices. I'm sorry. I should have been a better judge of character. I didn't say I accepted his apology. The wound was still too fresh. What do you plan to do next? I asked instead. I have an offer from Trinidad Bank, he replied. Not as interesting a job as yours, but stable. And you? Any chance of you coming back? If not now, when the situation becomes critical? I've been thinking. A week ago, I wouldn't have hesitated to rush to save the company. But now, after everything that's happened, after the humiliation, I don't know, Lowell. I honestly don't know. After talking to the former CFO, I couldn't concentrate on work. My thoughts kept returning to Brawley Chemicals, to the people who still worked there, to the customers who relied on our products. It wasn't just a company. It was part of Trinidad's economic ecosystem. Its collapse would affect hundreds, if not thousands of people. I decided to call Dora to see if she had heard anything about what was going on. Edith, I was just about to call you, she said instead of greeting me. Have you got the television on? No, why? Turn on any news channel, right now. I found the remote and turned on the TV, switching to the local news. The familiar Brawley Chemicals building appeared on the screen, with people holding placards in front of it. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, Mass protests against layoffs at Brawley Chemicals. Employees demand return of former management. Oh my God, I whispered, sinking down onto the couch. When did this start? About an hour ago, Dora answered. After Hazel announced that she was moving production to Mexico and closing two more departments, people just walked out of the building and refused to come back. The union backed them up, and now there's a real rally. The camera showed a close-up of one of the protesters. It was Vance Pryor, our production manager. Brawley Chemicals has always been more than just a company, he said into the microphone. It was a family. Mrs. Brawley created not just a business, but a community of people who cared about each other and the quality of their work. Now, all of that was being destroyed for short-term gain. I felt tears come to my eyes. I never thought that Vance, always so reserved and businesslike, was capable of such an emotional speech. "What are you going to do?" Dora asked. "People are practically begging you to come back." "I don't know," I answered honestly. "After what Hazel and Perry did to me, I'm not sure I can just let it go and come back, even for the sake of the staff." "I understand," Dora said softly. "But think about it. Maybe this is your chance to make things right without having to go through a long legal battle." After the conversation, I sat in front of the TV for a long time, watching the events unfold. The protests were getting bigger and bigger. Employees were joined by members of the local community concerned about the potential loss of jobs. Reporters tried to get a comment from Hazel or Perry, but they refused to go to press. Around noon, Oswald called. "Do you see what's going on?" he asked without preamble. "The whole town is talking about it." "I do," I replied. "I can't believe it's gotten this far in just 5 days." "They acted too abruptly and too confidently," said Oswald. "A classic mistake of inexperienced leaders. They think that they can change everything in one fell swoop, without taking into account the human factor and the established connections. What would you do in my place?" I asked my brother. "It's a difficult question," he said. "On the one hand, you've been betrayed by the people closest to you, and no one would blame you if you decided to leave things as they are. On the other, you created this company. It's run by people who believe in you, customers who trust you. Maybe you should give them all a second chance. What about Hazel and Perry?" My voice is shaky. "I'm not sure I can work with them again after everything that's happened. Who says you have to work with them?" Oswald snorted. "From what I see on the news, their days at Brawley Chemicals are numbered anyway. The only question is, who's going to replace them? I've been thinking, maybe Oswald's right. Maybe I should come back not for Hazel's sake, but for the sake of the company, for the sake of the people who still believe in me." I spent the whole day thinking, occasionally switching to the news. The situation around Brawley Chemicals was getting more and more tense. By late afternoon, it was reported that the company's stock had fallen 20% in just one day, an all-time record drop. Close to 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting company and went to the door with some wariness. When I looked through the peephole, I froze in amazement. Hazel stood on the doorstep. My first thought was not to open it. After everything that had happened, I wasn't ready for this meeting. But something about her, her disheveled hair, her pale face, her tense posture, made me change my mind. I opened the door but stood in the opening without inviting her in. "Hazel?" My voice sounded colder than I'd expected. What a surprise. Mom? She looked exhausted, almost sick. "I need to talk to you." "Please." I hesitated, then stepped back, allowing her to enter. Hazel walked into the living room and stopped in the middle of the room, looking around uncertainly. "It's a beautiful apartment," she said awkwardly. "It's cozy." "Thank you," I replied dryly. "But I doubt you're here to discuss my interior." Hazel took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. "No, of course not. I've come to... I came to ask for help, Mother. The company. The company's in trouble." "We. I know," I nodded, pointing to the TV, which was still showing news of the protests. All of Trinidad is aware. It's a lot worse than it looks. Hazel sank to the edge of the couch as if her legs wouldn't hold her. We're losing customers every hour. The bank denied credit. Global Kim withdrew its investment offer after today's news. Employees are refusing to work. It's a disaster. I looked at my daughter, trying to understand how I felt. Until a week ago, she was calling me a helpless old lady and kicking me out of the office. Now she was sitting in my living room, almost begging for help. Part of me wanted to feel gloating, but instead, all I felt was tiredness and a slight sadness. "What exactly do you want from me, Hazel?" I asked bluntly. "Come back." She looked up at me with a look of desperation. "Come back and take back control of the company. People will listen to you. Customers trust you. The bank will agree to a loan with you at the helm. What about you and Perry? What about your modernization and expansion plans? About selling the global cam stake?" "We were wrong," Hazel said quietly. "Yeah, I was wrong. I thought I knew better, that I could run the company more efficiently than you, that your methods were outdated. But now I see that I didn't really understand how things worked, how subtly you've built the whole system, all the connections." I kept quiet, letting her continue. "Perry and I are ready to step aside. You can come back as president, and we'll take whatever roles you see fit, or leave altogether, if that's what you want." "Where's Perry now?" I asked, noticing that she had come alone. Hazel looked away. "He's waiting in the car. Didn't dare come up. Said you probably wouldn't want to see him after what happened." "And he's right," I nodded. "What exactly made you come here today, Hazel? What was the final straw?" She pulled a clipboard out of her purse and handed it to me. A document was open on the screen, a preliminary report on the financial condition of Brawley Chemicals at the end of the day. "Look at the numbers," she said quietly. "If nothing changes, in 2 weeks we won't be able to pay our salaries. In a month, the company will be bankrupt." I looked at the document, and even my experienced eye was struck by the scale of the disaster, the outflow of funds, the drop in stock value, the broken contracts, the penalties for failure to deliver. How did they manage to bring the situation to this state in just 5 days? "What have you guys been doing all week?" I couldn't take it anymore. How could everything that had been built over decades be destroyed so quickly? "We thought we were being decisive and progressive." Hazel grinned bitterly. "Perry convinced me that we needed to make all the changes at once so that people wouldn't have time to organize resistance. What we didn't realize was that Brawley Chemicals had a soul, that it wasn't just a collection of assets and processes that could be reshaped at will." I handed her the clipboard back to her and stood up, walking over to the window. Outside the glass, evening was beginning to fall, the lights of the city coming on. Somewhere out there, a few kilometers away, there was a building with the Brawley Chemicals logo on it, a symbol of everything I'd accomplished in my life, and now that legacy was on the verge of disappearing. "You know," I began slowly, "when I started the company, everyone told me I'd never make it. A woman in the chemical industry, with no serious investors, with ideas that seemed too idealistic for the time. But I believed I was doing something important, something right." I turned to Hazel. "Even in the toughest of times, and there were many, I never considered abandoning my principles for a quick profit. I never sacrificed quality to cut costs, never betrayed the people who believed in me." Hazel lowered her head, unable to bear my gaze. "I know, Mom. I apologize for everything I said at the ceremony, for what Perry and I did to you. It was unforgivable." "Yes, it was, and I agree. And I'm not sure I can forgive it. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let the company die along with your career." Hazel looked up, a faint hope in her eyes. "Will you come back?" I'll think about it, I replied. I need time to weigh everything. And I need assurances, legal assurances, that if I come back, I'll have full control of the company. No joint decisions, no sharing of power. Sure, Hazel agreed quickly. Perry and I will sign whatever we need to sign, tomorrow, today, when you say so. One more thing, I added. Perry has to go. Completely. I won't work with a man who threw my personal belongings out the window and threatened to call the police if I don't leave the building. Hazel visibly tensed. He's he's my husband, Mom. And I'm not telling you to divorce him, I clarified. It's just that he can't stay at the company. Not in any position. That's my condition. She paused, clearly struggling with herself, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll tell him. He'll understand. I doubt it, I said. But that's his problem, not mine. Hazel stood up, looking at me uncertainly. When will you give me an answer? Time is playing against us. Every day things get worse. I'll call you tomorrow morning, I said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to be alone and think things over. She nodded and headed for the door. Hazel turned around as she grabbed the handle. Thank you for at least listening to me, Mom. Yeah, I know I don't even deserve that. When the door closed behind her, I turned back to the window. In the darkness, I could make out the silver sedan parked outside the house. Perry was indeed waiting in the car. I could see his silhouette in the driver's seat, the tense posture, the nervous tapping of his fingers on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to go down and tell him everything I thought about his actions, but the other part realized that would just be a waste of time. Perry wasn't a movie villain, just an ambitious man who overestimated his abilities and underestimated the complexity of the business he was trying to change. I turned away from the window and dialed Oswald's number. Hazel was just at my place, I said when he answered. She asked me to come back and save the company. And what did you decide? Oswald asked without surprise, as if he had expected this call. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. Part of me wants to give up, after all they have done. But another part of me remembers the people who still work there, the customers who rely on our products. Whatever you decide, I'll support you, Oswald said simply. Do you want me to come over? We'll discuss everything in person? Not necessary, I replied. I need to be alone and think it over. It's a decision I have to make on my own. Hanging up the phone, I did what always helped me think. I made a strong tea and sat down at the table with a piece of paper. Old-fashioned but effective, I wrote down the pros and cons of returning to Brawley Chemicals. On the pros list were saving the company, protecting jobs, preserving the legacy, being able to continue important environmental projects. On the cons list, having to work with Hazel again, the arduous process of regaining the trust of clients and partners, the sheer amount of stress at an age when many are already enjoying a well-deserved vacation. I stared at these two lists, trying to decide which outweighed which. From the window of my new apartment, I could see the bay, the same one I loved to look out of my office window on the 15th floor. The world seemed both familiar and brand new, full of possibilities and choices that a week ago I hadn't even considered. What did I really want? To return to what I had known all my life, or find a new path, free from the burden of responsibility for hundreds of employees and million-dollar contracts? The decision didn't come immediately, but as it took shape in my mind, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if I'd finally found the right answer to a complex equation I'd been struggling with for hours. I picked up my phone and texted a quick message to Hazel. Meet me at my apartment at 9 tomorrow morning. No Perry. Bring all the necessary paperwork to hand over control. I have an answer. Sending the message, I turned back to the window. The silver sedan was still parked outside the house. I watched Hazel get into the car as she and Perry talked tensely about something. Then the car started up and disappeared around the corner. Tomorrow I would give them my answer, an answer that I hoped was the right one, not only for me, but for everyone who associated their lives with Brawley Chemicals. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell rang. I was ready. I'd gotten up early, cleaned up, even made coffee and snacks, though I doubted the conversation would last long enough to need a treat. I took a deep breath before opening it, gathering my thoughts. A night of reflection had brought clarity, and I was confident in my decision. Hazel looked even worse than yesterday. The shadows under her eyes were deeper. Her skin had taken on an unhealthy grayish tint. In her hands, she held a bulky folder with documents. "Good morning, Mom," she said quietly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." I nodded and let her inside. We walked to the living room, where I gestured for her to sit down. "Coffee?" I asked, more out of politeness than a desire to delay the start of a serious conversation. "No, thank you." Hazel shook her head. "Yeah, I can't eat or drink anything since yesterday. My stomach is cramping from the strain." I sat down across from her, keeping a calm expression on my face. "Did you bring the papers?" "Yes." She placed the folder on the coffee table between us. "Everything you need to transfer full control of the company is in here. Reverse stock transfers, canceling previous agreements, canceling all the appointments made in the last week. Bennett had it all set up last night. He said he'd be willing to come over if his presence was needed to certify." I picked up the folder, but I didn't open it. "How is the company today?" Hazel grinned bitterly. "The worst. Two more clients officially canceled their contracts. The stock was down another 15% in morning trading. The employees are on strike demanding your return. Even security's refusing to work. Perry tried last night to convince the bank to give us at least a short-term loan to pay our salaries, but was turned down. They said," she stammered, "they said they didn't trust the current management." I nodded, not surprised by this news. The market is always sensitive to instability, especially when it's caused by ill-conceived management actions. "What about Perry? Did you talk to him about my condition?" "Yes," Hazel swallowed. He's agreed to leave the company. Said he understood your position and didn't want to be an obstacle to saving the business." I raised an eyebrow, not hiding my skepticism. "That doesn't sound like the Perry I know." "He's changed this week," Hazel said quietly. "We've both changed. It's sobering to see what you thought was your future destroyed." "It's sobering." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the morning Trinidad. The city was living its normal life. People were rushing to work. Stores were opening. Buses were passing by. The world hadn't stopped because of the crisis at Brawley Chemicals, although it probably seemed that way to Hazel now. "You know," I began without turning around, "in these 5 days since, after what happened at the ceremony, I've been thinking a lot about the company, about myself, about what I really want out of the remaining years of my life." I turned to my daughter, and I came to a surprising conclusion. I don't want to go back to Brawley Chemicals. Hazel looked as if I'd hit her. She opened her mouth but couldn't get a word out. "Don't get me wrong," I continued. "I love this company. I put 40 years of my life into it, my heart and soul. But the last few years, it's been more of a burden than a joy. Endless reports, board meetings, quarterly results, competing with the competition. I've gotten so caught up in it that I've almost forgotten why I started chemistry in the first place." I walked back to my chair and sat down, looking directly at Hazel. "When you and Perry kicked me out, I was devastated. I felt betrayed, humiliated, lost. But then, as the days went by, I began to feel something else relief, like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders that I'd been carrying for so long that I'd stopped noticing it." "But the company," Hazel began in a shaky voice, "the people who work there, the customers. I'm not saying I don't care, I interrupted her gently. Of course I care about the fate of the people who have been with me all these years. But I also realize that I can't be responsible for everyone and everything forever. At some point, you have to learn to let go. I took a cup of coffee and took a sip, giving Hazel time to consider my words. What? What are you suggesting? She finally asked, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. Just let the company go bankrupt? Let everything you've built disappear? No, I shook my head. I'm suggesting that you learn to deal with the consequences of your decisions. You wanted a company, you got it. Now it's in crisis, and it's your responsibility to find a way out. But I don't know how, Hazel almost shouted. I've tried. Perry and I have tried everything we can think of. No one wants anything to do with us after what happened. Everyone wants you back. Because you tried to change everything all at once without understanding how the system works, I explained. You fired people who were the heart of the company. You cut ties that had been built over decades. They thought only about quick profits, not long-term stability. Hazel lowered her head, recognizing that I was right. What should I do, Mom? She asked quietly. Just tell me, and I'll do it. I don't want it to end like this. I looked at my daughter, confused, scared, facing the consequences of her actions for the first time in her life that she had no control over. Part of me wanted to just hug her, to tell her that everything would be okay, that I would fix it. But I knew that would be wrong, for her and for me. Hazel, I'm not coming back as president of the company, I said firmly. This decision is final, but I can offer an alternative. She looked up, a faint hope in her eyes. What? I'm willing to act as a temporary consultant, help you stabilize the situation, regain the trust of key clients and partners, but with a few conditions. Any conditions? Quickly agreed Hazel. First, I won't work in the office of Brawley Chemicals. All meetings take place on neutral territory or here in my apartment. Secondly, I'm only talking to you. No contact with Perry. Third, all of my recommendations are either accepted in full or I terminate immediately. And fourth, and most importantly, this is a temporary measure, 3 months max. After that, you manage on your own or look for other options. Hazel listened attentively, nodding after each point. I agree to all the terms, she said when I was done. Thank you, Mom. I knew you wouldn't leave us in the lurch. I'm not doing this for you or Perry, I clarified. I'm doing it for the people who still work at the company, for the customers who rely on our products, and for myself to know that I've done everything I can before I start a new chapter of my life. A new chapter? Hazel interjected. Do you, do you have plans? Yes. I allowed myself a slight smile. I decided to open a small research lab with Lawrence Fielding. We're going to focus on developing environmentally friendly alternatives to industrial chemicals, the very field you and Perry were going to shut down. No mass production, just research and development of formulas that we'll license to interested companies. Hazel looked surprised. You're not kidding? Starting a new business at your age? What's the big deal? I shrugged. I'm 68, not 98. I have a clear mind, experience, and passion for what I do. Do you need anything else? No, probably not, Hazel answered slowly. It's just, I always thought that Brawley Chemicals was your whole life, that without it you'd feel lost. I finished it for her. I did for the first couple days, but then I realized that the company isn't me. I'm so much more than just the president of Brawley Chemicals. I have knowledge, experience, connections, ideas, and now I have the freedom to use it all the way I want without having to report to the board of directors or worry about the stock price. I could see Hazel trying to make sense of this new reality, a mother who not only refuses to save the company, but plans for the future without her. When do we start? She finally asked. The counseling, I mean. Today, I replied. But first, I need a complete picture of the current state of affairs. All the financial statements, a list of clients who have broken or are about to break contracts, information on debts, production status. I'll send it all over within the hour. Hazel nodded. What should I tell the employees and the press? They're expecting you back. Tell the truth, I said simply, that I'm not coming back permanently, but I've agreed to help as a consultant to stabilize the situation, without too much detail or drama. Hazel stood up, getting ready to leave. Thank you, Mom, for at least agreeing to help, even though you had every right to say no after what I did to you. I'm up too. Hazel, I want you to understand one important thing. Just because I agreed to help the company doesn't mean I've forgiven or forgotten what happened. Words matter. Actions have consequences. And some wounds don't heal simply because it's convenient for us to forget about them. I understand, she replied quietly. And I don't expect forgiveness, just thank you. After she left, I called Oswald to tell him about the decision. Are you sure you can handle it? He asked after I had explained my plan of action. Advising a company in crisis while launching a new project with Lawrence? That's a lot of pressure. I can handle it, I said confidently. Besides, it's only temporary, 3 months tops, and I'll be completely free of all obligations to Brawley Chemicals. And what if the situation does not stabilize in 3 months? Oswald asked a logical question. What if the company goes down anyway? I thought, but only for a moment. Then so be it. I'll do what I can to help, but I won't sacrifice my future for the past. That's a lesson I've learned over the past week very well. The next 3 months turned out to be some of the busiest of my life. By day, I counseled Hazel, helping her clear out the rubble she and Perry had created in 5 disastrous days. In the evenings, I worked with Lawrence on the plan for our new lab, the incorporation paperwork, finding space and equipment. At first, it seemed that Brawley Chemicals could still be saved. Several key clients agreed to return when they heard that I was back in the business, albeit as a consultant. The bank reconsidered its decision and granted a short-term loan to pay salaries. The employees ended the strike and went back to work. But the deeper I delved into the situation, the clearer it became that the damage was too severe. Hazel and Perry hadn't just laid off key employees and ruined relationships with customers, they had taken out huge loans against the company's assets, hoping for an investment from Global Chem that never materialized. The debt load was so high that even in the most optimistic scenario, the company could not have recovered from the crisis without external injections. By the end of my second month of consulting, it was clear that bankruptcy was unavoidable. I called a meeting with Hazel, Bennett Huxley, and the few remaining board members. We need to prepare for a controlled bankruptcy, I said bluntly, showing the latest financial statements. The debts are too high and the income is insufficient to service them. If we start the process now, we can protect at least some of the assets and maybe save some jobs. Hazel looked devastated but not surprised. She'd learned a lot in those 2 months, including how to face the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. I agree, she said quietly. What do we need to do? We devised a plan, preparing for bankruptcy proceedings, finding potential buyers for certain parts of the company, developing a support program for employees who would inevitably lose their jobs. All this time, Perry stayed out of the picture, as we had agreed, although Hazel occasionally mentioned that he was very worried and would like to help. At the end of the third month, the auction for the sale of the assets of Brawley Chemicals took place. I didn't attend in person. My consultant contract had ended the week before, and I was fully focused on launching Lawrence and I a new company we called EcoChem Innovations. But Dora, who was covering the event for her newspaper, gave me all the details. The main manufacturing facilities had been bought by a large multinational corporation that planned to keep about a third of the jobs. The research division had been acquired by a local pharmaceutical company. The Brawley Chemicals brand and a few patents had gone, ironically, to Global Chem, the very competitors with whom Hazel and Perry planned to make a deal. How did Hazel take it all? I asked Dora over dinner that night. Stoically, she replied. She was dignified, answered the questions of the press honestly, without trying to shift the blame on someone else. She said she was fully aware of her responsibility for what had happened and would live with that knowledge for the rest of her life. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and pride. Yes, pride, exactly. Despite her mistakes, Hazel had finally grown up, learned to accept the consequences of her actions. And Perry? I asked, though I was almost certain of the answer. He wasn't at the auction. Dora confirmed my suspicions. Rumor had it he'd left for Miami last week, alone. I didn't say anything, but I couldn't say I was surprised. Perry had always struck me as the kind of man who thought of himself first in times of need. A week after the auction, I moved into my new home, a small but comfortable cottage in a quiet neighborhood in Trinidad, not far from the space Lawrence and I had rented for our lab. Oswald and Dora helped with the move, and when all the boxes were brought in and set out, we had a small celebratory dinner on the new terrace. Here's to new beginnings. Oswald raised his glass. And to my sister, who has proved that at any age you can start again. And to freedom, Dora added. Freedom to choose your own path, regardless of the expectations of others. I smiled, clinking my hands together. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Are you expecting someone else? Oswald wondered. I shook my head and went to open it. Hazel stood on the threshold with a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. Hello, Mother, she said uncertainly. I heard you'd moved and I wanted to wish you a happy housewarming. I looked at my daughter, thinner, with new wrinkles around her eyes, but somehow more real than before. Without the glossy facade of successful business executive she'd so carefully maintained over the years. Thank you. I accepted the flowers. We're just having dinner on the terrace. Oswald and Dora are here too. Oh, Hazel was visibly embarrassed. I didn't mean to intrude. I'll just leave this and go. You can join us if you want, I suggested, surprised at my own words. Nothing fancy, just dinner. She looked at me in disbelief. Really? You? Do you mind? We're not going to talk about the past, I warned her. Not the company or what happened, just the present and the future. Hazel nodded slowly. I'd like that. Very much. We returned to the terrace, where Oswald and Dora greeted Hazel with polite surprise. The awkwardness of the first few minutes gradually melted away, and the conversation flowed more easily. Hazel told us that she planned to move to Portland, where she had been offered a position with a small consulting firm. She didn't mention Perry, and we didn't ask. When it got dark and Dora started home, offering Oswald a ride, I walked them to the door. Hazel got up too, but stayed on the terrace looking at the starry sky. Thank you for the evening, Mother, she said when I returned. It was good. I nodded, not wanting to overstate the significance of the dinner. One meeting couldn't undo everything that had happened between us. When are you leaving for Portland? I asked. In 2 weeks, she answered. A new life, a new city. I think I need it. I agree, I said. Sometimes you need a complete change of scenery to really start over. Hazel paused, as if gathering her courage. Mom, I know you said not to talk about the past, but I have to say it at least once. I'm really sorry. That day, those words, everything. I was blinded by ambition and pride, and I didn't see how much pain I was causing the person closest to me. I was silent, not knowing what to say. Part of me still wasn't ready to forgive, But another part of me realized that holding on to a grudge meant I was tied to a past I decided to let go of. I'm not apologizing, Hazel continued, seeing my silence. I just want you to know that I realize what I did, and I will live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. I nodded, accepting her words. Thank you for your honesty, Hazel. I appreciate it. She smiled, tentatively, hopefully. Could, can I call you from Portland? Just to let you know how I'm doing. You can, I answered after a short pause. I'd be glad to know how you're doing. When Hazel left, I stayed on the terrace, looking at the stars and thinking about the strange turns life takes. 6 weeks ago, I was the president of a major company, confident that I would spend the rest of my days running my life's work. Today, I was sitting in my own new home, with plans for a completely different future, free of the burden I had carried for so long. Brawly chemicals no longer existed, at least not in the way I had created and known it all those years ago. My daughter was leaving for another city, starting her life over. And I could finally just be Edith instead of Mrs. Brawley, president of the company. In the morning, I woke up at sunrise like I always did, but instead of immediately reaching for the phone and checking the mail, I just lay in bed, enjoying the silence and the light coming through the curtains. A day full of possibilities lay ahead. A meeting with equipment suppliers for our new lab, lunch with Lawrence to discuss the first projects, an evening walk along the waterfront that I had long promised myself but had always been too busy. Life went on, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free to choose, free to dream, free to be myself, without looking past the expectations of others, without the burden of responsibility for hundreds of coworkers, without the shadow of toxic relationships that had defined my life for too long. I got out of bed, opened the window, and took a deep breath of fresh morning air. A new day, a new life, a new me.